first and foremost, I want to thank you for coming on the platform. This is definitely an honor.
Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me. I didn't know anything about your program or your platform. I'm glad you found me. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
I'm pretty
But
low tech, so tell me if you need me to move somewhere or you need me to get to a different light or I don't really know about stuff like that much at all.
no, you good, you good. For the
Okay.
viewers who may not recognize you, let them know who you are and definitely where you from.
My name is Eddie B. Allen Jr. I am an author and a filmmaker, aspiring screenwriter, producer. I've worked on several independent projects in addition to the current process now that I'm involved with of adapting my book, Low Road, The Life and Legacy of Donald Goines, into a feature film. My other commercially published book is Our Auntie Rosa. The family of Rosa Parks remembers her life and lessons. I am based and am here now in Detroit, Michigan.
Wow, that's what's up. Big shout out to the D, man. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, so we right around the
Yeah,
way.
I saw. Yeah, I saw that. I used to work in Toledo, so I'm familiar. We've had family in Cleveland for years and years, also. So yeah, I was just up the road from you 20 years ago, 20 plus. I was at a
Yeah.
paper called The Blade.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. We got family in Detroit and Chicago too. I guess the people was kind of migrating back and forth back in the days.
Yeah, I really think that's it. A lot of close cousins in Chicago that I have right now.
Mm-hmm. Now I can ask you this: coming from Detroit, what inspired you to kind of get into journalism and film? Was that something you kind of fell in love with simultaneously, or you kind of
No, no,
okay?
it's kind of interesting actually. I shouldn't say reconnected. I was going to say reconnected with one of my mentors. His name is Ozzy Bruno. I was about 15 years old, going through something kind of silly. I can't even remember what it was, but something going on that I didn't like about, what my parents were telling me to do or not do. And I was creative. I've always been a writer since I was about fourth grade, third or fourth grade. We used to have what they call young authors competitions, and I wrote these books about myself as an NFL player or whatever exciting adventure I had. I put myself into these characters. So I've always been a writer, and around this time that I was 15 or so, going through whatever it was, I conceived and wrote a little sort of outline description of a TV show. And my thought, like even now today, I'm very optimistic and I swing for the fence. And I looked up what then was on the air, a show called Ebony Jet Showcase. It has not aired for many years, but as the name suggests, it was a showcase on television that was linked directly to the Johnson Publications Ebony and Jet magazines. And Ozzy, my mentor, to be, took the time. I thought, which now looking back, it was amazing, because whatever little bit I wrote, I'm sure it didn't have any professional quality or insight to it. But I got a letter from him signed. He was vice president of sales and syndication. Signed Ozzy Bruno, and it explained in all these professional terms that he was pleased to read my idea, happy to review it. Unfortunately, the showcase could not avail itself to me, I think was the language, because of lack of resources at the time. So, he didn't come down at me like, get out of here with this little kid mess. But he took me kind of as a little protege. He was in town traveling for the showcase, promoting it. And that kind of thing. We would have lunch, dinner every so often when he was in Detroit. And to make a very long story short, my writing took the trajectory of print journalism because I found that was a realistic and viable way to make a living versus at that time writing books and doing some of the other things that it's not that they're not viable, but they are not as viable as the day job that I was pretty much conditioned that I should be trying to get. And my degree was from Wayne State University right here in Detroit. I went to journalism school, and after about I guess it was roughly 20 years or so, I became a freelancer after a succession of jobs that I lost in the field of journalism. I'm laid off, company buys the paper, and all of a sudden, I'm laid off again, that kind of thing. And just in the last 10, 15 years has been sort of my return to the passion that I had back then for TV and film. But it's been a good little while, actually, since the book Low Road, the Donald Goines bio that I just mentioned, that I've been working on turning that into a feature. Now it's just kind of full speed ahead. I still love writing, but I've got a whole lot more interest in putting things on the screen than I do on just the page. Sorry, that was my essay answer for you. So,
No, that's dope. That's dope, man. I mean, that's just amazing how life, works. So you actually like living your dream. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people
yeah,
gave up, and then, like you
yeah.
say, you even got to the point where you even went back on some stuff, and you still utilizing it to this day, and you've been able to make money and affect people's lives, and so that's real cool.
Hey, man, I think that's beautiful for you to say. Sometimes, I question whether it's happening the way I'd like. I don't always see the impact that I prefer to see. But that's a lot of us. I'm hard driving, and I think I set my goals so high. I'm one of these people. It's hard not to be disappointed when I don't, hit the grand slam every time. But it's a blessing that, like I say, I was just talking to Ozzy, my mentor. I was just talking to him literally days ago about this sort of full circle journey that I've traveled. Because once you go to print, there are very few who usually slip back into or do the other side with the production and the cameras. And that's a whole different skill set that I'm sort of getting an interest in from the writing side, but interested more and more in seeing my images on screen.
Okay, cool. Now you had mentioned earlier about, working for different like I guess outlets and writing for them and then, having to go from one outlet to the other. I wanted to ask you, I guess, for some advice because like I do a lot of interviews. It's all like, video call. But I was trying
Mm-hmm.
to get myself in a situation where I don't know if it's even possible or people may be interested, but if I could say if I interview you, but then I could write about it, you know what I'm saying, and have a person read it in case they don't catch my show. Maybe say it for like you say Jet magazine or Ebony magazine or whatever magazine. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, but I'm not sure I understand. Is the question about the interviewing process? Is that what you're asking?
No, I mean just in terms of I guess making that transition. I'll continue to do my show. I'm doing a podcast basically, but I want
Mm-hmm.
to get to the point where I'm like writing the articles because everybody don't do the podcast. So
I
just
got you.
taking it
Mm-hmm.
to another level, like
Got
what
you.
your thoughts on that in any capacity.
Got you. It is really a skill set, and I would say, I think I'm more fascinated really with guys like you, who know how to work the technical stuff and who know how to put the things, even as simple as it might be. It's not, it's like wizardry for me. I don't know much about that, but the human communication, you just really, I think, want to think about helping your audience get to know your subject. They should always feel, bottom line, like they met this person or they had at least some experience and some encounter based on the dialogue or I should say, the interaction that you have, the interface that you have with them. That's kind of the basic rule of I think most interviews. If you don't get a sense of that person by the time the interview has ended, your readers, your viewers, they're not likely to have that either. And I think in your case, it's kind of an easy transition because you've got it preserved in recording, and it would be maybe something to consider to just go back and do Q&As from your transcript if you want to do something in print or online, website, whatever. I'm sorry, once again, I'm not the tech guy to tell you how to maximize that exposure or, develop the social media followers, that kind of thing. But I think you kind of have the advantage in that, going from broadcast, podcast to print versus, guy like me starting out with just a notepad, you know, as I did on the interviews when I would be on assignment, and still my freelance assignments. I don't do too much, even with a recorder. I'm old school. I write it down and then I type it up on the computer. But yeah, that would be my thought, is keeping in mind the focus and the substance of it. I could tell, I don't mean to be so critical, but I could tell, this interview that everybody was talking so much and so long about, it could have been so much better if it were not for Cat Williams. I don't think that Shannon Sharp would have done too well at all, because you could see he didn't really know how to do an interview. Cat just had a lot to say, which saved him. But I got to know Cat a little better, and probably you, if you watched, and all those who were talking about this interview forever and ever, mainly because of the controversial things Cat said. I got to know him because Cat kept talking, not because Shannon knew which questions to ask.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. That's a good analogy. I like how you put that together. That makes a lot of sense.
Hope
Now I want,
hope I answered your question somewhere and all that.
yeah, yeah,
That.
definitely, man. Most definitely. I appreciate you. Now I can ask you about your project, Our Auntie Rosa. If you could
Uh,
kind of talk about what even inspired you to write about Rosa Parks, and what was that process like?
man, that was purely a blessing. My Donald Goines bio, which I've mentioned a couple of times, found me speaking to a probate lawyer, really, really good guy, named Larry Pepper, and he's here in the Detroit area. He handled the Donald Goines estate. And book Donald Goines' bio came out in '04. We stayed in touch, not nothing too frequent, but however it happened, I liked him. He took time to help me. He seemed to like me. It was maybe 10 years, 9 years later, he explains to me, in the midst of some of the very public turmoil, very public acrimony. There's an organization called sorry, I don't think I'm gonna remember to call the right name right now, but Mrs. Parks, who also, for those who don't know, Mrs. Parks lived basically the second half of her life in Detroit. She was run out of Montgomery, Alabama, like an outlaw, literally. And it's really interesting to remember, and those who don't know and don't think about it, that was not fame and glory, by no means. That was not a happy storybook ending to her life, because she got her face in the newspaper, and her name, and she's the mother of the movement and all that stuff. She had to go back home to a neighborhood that was not at all pleased. I should say a community at large. Her neighborhood, obviously, was segregated. But the white people in Montgomery, Alabama, they did not give her a hero's welcome. So she was basically displaced, forced to leave with her husband, and relocated here to Detroit, where she remained for the rest of her life. Getting back to the answer to your question, she created an institute, a youth institute, and I wish I could remember the name. It was the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development, perhaps is what it was called. So that was established here in Detroit. And when Mrs. Parks became, older and eventually passed, she had an assistant who told Mrs. Parks' heirs, who she had no children. These were all her nieces and nephews. These were the closest she ever had to children, because they did have a close relationship. And Mrs. Parks' assistant, who took over the organization that Mrs. Parks had established, she said that Mrs. Parks had left everything of her valuables, of her mementos, and things that, for example, they argued in court over the jacket. Excuse me, it wasn't a jacket; it was an overcoat that Mrs. Parks wore on the bus when she was arrested. Mrs. Steele was her name. She said Mrs. Parks left all of that to the Institute. And there was a conflict that became very public, and it became a court battle, whereby the nieces and nephews are saying, well, no, Auntie Rosa gave that to me. This was mine. Auntie Rosa said I could have it, and the will, I guess, was, a whole nother question. But I'm sorry for being so long-winded. Larry Pepper, the lawyer, found himself representing the estate of Mrs. Parks on the nieces and nephews side. And one of the things that they felt was a misrepresentation, and had always bothered them. Mrs. Parks, you might or might not recall, Mrs. Parks was brutally attacked. She was assaulted by a drug addict here in Detroit. And there were just some other occasions when there were some in the public who felt that her family should be looking out for her. And why do they have her living in that neighborhood and things like that? Well, Mrs. Parks was very independent. You couldn't talk Mrs. Parks, the lady who was ready to sit down and face the wrath of Montgomery, Alabama's police force and whatever else. You couldn't talk Mrs. Parks into doing anything she wasn't willing to do, and she didn't want to leave her house, and she wanted to remain independent. But there were things like that the family felt that there was unfair criticism because they said they had always been a part of Mrs. Parks' life since she moved to Detroit. She stayed with their father, Sylvester, who was Mrs. Parks' brother. So they even lived in the house as children with Mrs. Parks, and they felt very much committed to their aunt's legacy, and they wanted to write a book. And Larry Pepper said, "Hey, I have a friend," and he called me up. So I don't know. I'm sorry, man. Reporter in me overly over details sometimes. I don't even know how long we have, but that's the full story. It came to me. I didn't go looking for it, but it was an amazing blessing getting to know Mrs. Parks through them, through her family.
Wow, wow, that's amazing, man. No, I appreciate you even going into detail like that because I mean, like you say, the mother of a movement, she affected so many people's lives. Big shout out to Larry Pepper. I don't know if he's still around, but
Oh,
that
yeah,
was
yeah, he is.
that's
Yeah,
dope.
I'm gonna make sure that he sees the show if you tell me how to distribute it, that kind of thing. Yeah, he's still around. Good guy. Larry is Jewish, raised, and it is absolutely a blessing to know people of all backgrounds, nationalities, what have you. I think you and I, from what I've seen and what I read, what I saw online when you first invited me on the show, I think we have some similar cultural and political values. But man, good people, they come in every persuasion, perform, and I would have never had my name on that book without him thinking, hey, I can help you with that. And I do believe it ultimately helped to vindicate them. They didn't really care, so much about what people thought in the general sense, but it was the fact that it was absolutely untrue. They really did love and have a good relationship with their aunt. In fact, Mrs. Parks was partly to blame for why they were not more publicly visible, because they explained that there were oftentimes they would want her, I should say, to tell them stories about the movement, talk to them about certain experiences, and Mrs. Parks would shy away from it, and she'd say, "I just want to be Auntie Rosa, let's go to Boblo Island, which was here many years ago. It was an amusement park in the Detroit area. They did family stuff, and Mrs. Parks, in part, she wanted to keep it that way. So it was not like Mrs. Parks gave very many opportunities for her family to be shining and visible in her life. But it was a blessing to help them tell some of the stories that they had kept to themselves all that time. And now it was being said again, although much more, with more vicious intent. The other side on this legal battle is trying to say these people, they just showed up out of nowhere. The Institute is what Mrs. Parks loved, and et cetera, blah blah blah. And I think that was true. That Mrs. Parks absolutely valued young people and the programs that were created through her institute. But it's not at all true that her family hadn't been there. They just hadn't been there in the way that the public would necessarily know about.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I definitely understand that, man. Because sometimes that stuff could be traumatizing to relive it and re-talk about that stuff, especially when you're trying to move on. You don't mean mean no harm by not sharing the information. But our people went through some stuff, man.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Excellent point. Mrs. Parks, we could talk. You need to stop me when I ramble too long. But yeah, Mrs. Parks, we could do an hour all by herself. There was not too much. Mrs. Parks, to be barely 100 pounds, and a lady who looked like she might be a librarian. Mrs. Parks was absolutely fearless. And even here in Detroit, in some of my research, that was supplementary. It was supplemental to some of the things that the family shared with me. There were papers, hate mail that I found, that people found her here in Detroit and wrote about things like shooting her at sundown, you know, It was, yeah, like you say, that's something I hadn't really thought about. Mrs. Parks, certainly it wasn't a picnic, but yeah, there might have been trauma that she absolutely didn't want to be revisit when she's just spending time with her nieces and nephews. Because it's not like it even ended when she got here. She was hated for a very, very long time by a good portion of the country before she was eventually accepted and regarded as a heroine.
Indeed, indeed. Now I want to ask you about your book, The Low Road, about Donald Goines. So you wrote that before. Man, what even inspired you to want to write about Donald Goines? Because I guess he passed away before I was born, but I got a chance to read his books almost 40 years later, and not only his life, but his books in itself is just so like, just I don't know, like a mythical. He became like a mythical figure, I guess, because of the way he died and the way he lived, and
Yeah.
you never know if certain things are true about him or this, that, and the third. But what drew you to creating that project?
Yeah, it was again. I was approached, and like you, actually, I hadn't been in the world. You say before you were born. I hadn't been in the world very long when Mr. Goins was murdered. His nephew, to the question, his nephew Charles Glover, who has been sort of, I guess you could say, my partner ever since. Charles had it in his mind, and for many years apparently, that he wanted to have what he called then an authorized biography of his uncle, because the book Donald Writes No More, which was published by Holloway House, which was the publisher of the Donald Goines novels. They kind of rushed it to print, and it was a book that was truly not a biography. It had even a disclaimer on the inside of the book, something along the lines of characters and incidents represented here may be fictitious. Well, that's the opposite of a biography. If you're making stuff up, obviously. And Charles and his mom, his aunt, nobody really, I guess, took that biography seriously. And coming from, as I think I mentioned earlier, I used to work in Toledo, Ohio. It happened that I was at a paper called The Blade. Charles Glover was the general manager of a radio station there. And through a mutual friend, we met after I left the Blade. And I was actually back here in Detroit, but we still had a friend in Toledo who introduced us, because I think even then, sort of getting the bug again for broadcasting, and always had some interest in talk radio, that sort of thing. So he hooked Charles and I up, and we were talking in general about some of the things that we both had some interest in. And one day he just said, I had this crazy uncle. And the more he says, I said, your uncle was Donald Goines? And he said, yeah. And I could remember then my cousins. I'm the oldest. My brother is 8, 9 years younger than me. So I had cousins who kind of molded me, 4 girls, and they were babysitters to me at various times. There's Carol, Patty, Helene, and Rosa, in case I send them a piece of what we talked about. And I can remember times when they would be sitting, I'm watching TV or playing on the floor, whatever I'm doing, and covering their face is a book, and the cover says Dope Fiend or Daddy Cool or whatever it was they were reading at the time. And I kind of flashed back to the fact that I had been around Donald Goines novels just about my whole life. Had not read very much. I think I might have read Dope Fiend, which was the classic, the first book that was printed. And for those, I guess, who might not know, of your listeners, your viewers, for those who might not know, Donald Goines wrote in the 1970s. He had developed a heroin addiction as a teenager, coming back from Korea, as best anybody can determine it. He developed his habit while he was fighting overseas. He enlisted improperly, illegally, whatever the proper term is. He used a false birth certificate, and it allowed him to appear as if he was old enough to join the Air Force. And he came back with a full-blown heroin habit, which kind of ruled the rest of his life, including a stint as a petty criminal, pimp, moonshiner. He did all kinds of crazy things, exploits. He robbed. He, served some time in prison, and it was in prison where he discovered, with the influence and the example of Iceberg Slim, who was a pimp out of Chicago and who Holloway House had also published. He discovered that he had a gift for writing. So he wrote about things that he had either done himself or witnessed in the streets. And his novels still sell today. So I wrote a book about a guy who wrote books, basically.
Wow, wow. But you wrote about one of the best, you know what I'm saying? Definitely on the street
Yeah,
side, man. Those books is amazing.
yeah, I
Now I
appreciate
guess I
that.
Yeah, yeah. And I wanted to ask you, I guess, um, now according to his family, like what type of person was he? Because I've always heard that like you say, he went to jail, he got addicted to drugs, he was in the streets and this, that, and the third. Did his nephew tell you anything about him as a person? I guess how you would look at your uncle, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, and that last part you said, yeah, though he's the nephew, and as I say, he called him his crazy uncle. He described his uncle as hilarious for one thing. One of those personalities where he's funny and not trying to be, because of how out there his thinking is. He describes, and I mentioned this. I discuss this as Charles shared it with me in the book. He talks about before the writing career took off. Obviously, he talks about how his uncle is there at his mother's, Charles's grandmother's house, and they're just kind of sitting, and his uncle is, in deep thought about something, and he keeps hearing boom, 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 faintly in the distance. And he's trying to ask his uncle, "What's that noise?" And his uncle's like, "Shut up." And over again, this is the routine until finally he says, "Well, I guess I might as well tell you." And he says, basically, we got this cat locked up in the trunk outside of the house, and we're trying to figure out what to do with and he's talking to a kid at this point who I think is 12, 13 years old, you know, just as matter of fact, and that was one of any number of incidents that, he's just being himself, cat who's out here, hustling, trying to make some sense of his life and get to where he needs to be by any means necessary, but he's coming up with these exploits that are some of the most hilarious, and then the craziest. He, I think, was never, a vicious person. I don't think in his mind he was ever one who had it. He never had the heart, I don't believe, from anything that I've ever heard or learned myself. He didn't have the heart of a killer, of a malicious type of criminal. Of course, obviously, there were bad decisions, like maybe, I don't know the circumstances of how Cat wound up in the trunk, but it was, I think, redeeming of him to be able to turn that corner and write, especially in what he did, which Charles also talked about. He was very concerned. The other side of him was very concerned about his family, and in particular that they never developed the habit that he did. And Charles shared memories, as did Charles's aunt, Donald Goines' younger sister, Joan. They shared memories of how he would force them to sit and watch him when he would, tie his reins off, and he would shoot up, and the whole bloody ritual of getting high and injecting heroin. He wanted them to see it and be disgusted by it. Is apparently, what his goal was, so that they would never want to do it. And Charles said he threatened him more than once about not following in that path. So really interesting character, I guess, is the short way to answer it. But yeah, they've had stories that tell, I think, a lot more about who the man was in general. Vulnerable, I think, is a word I would add. Very vulnerable. That's kind of the story. Our brothers, our cats who have lived or are living out in that life, who are struggling in the streets. A lot of times it is vulnerability that drives them in the direction of desperation, and the desperation leads to some of the bad decision making. So,
Wow, man, that's what's up. I'm currently in Ghana, man, but that's definitely
Oh
one of the
wow.
things. Yeah, yeah, I look forward to reading your book when I get back because I feel like anybody that most people I know once they read a Donald Goines book, they fall in love with his work. So that's like your
Yeah.
book is like the piece. You know what I'm saying? The missing piece because we want to know more about Donald.
Yeah, thank
Not,
you. We're reprinting with Kensington Books next year, by the way. So yeah, I want to share that with you and your readers. Kensington is giving it a whole new life. Kensington is the company that bought the entire Holloway House catalog. So they decided they wanted to be the place to go for all things Donald Goines, the Holloway House catalog of novels, and starting I think spring of 2025, also my biography. So
oh wow, that's
appreciate
dope.
that.
That's dope. Let me see. Okay, and I wanted to ask you one more question. I don't know if you could go into it or not, but obviously, Donald Goines, he got murdered, and it's always been rumors about what happened. Did you ever kind of come to a conclusion of what you think might have happened? Because some people were saying maybe it was a drug related thing, or maybe he wrote about certain people and they didn't like it, or maybe it was the book company, or
Mhm.
because you actually got a chance to talk to the family. So.
Yeah, I have not come to any conclusive determination. I did, I believe, I don't say it to be arrogant or anything, but I think I probably did the deepest dive in the 50 years. October 1974 will be 50 years since he and his wife, common law, but his wife, Shirley Saylor, it was a double murder. They were both killed in Highland Park, which is basically a Detroit city that is adjacent. It's got its own municipality, but basically Highland Park and Detroit are the Detroit area. They were murdered together, and in those 50 years since that happened, I did. Not even as deep of a dive as I would like, but I did as deep of a dive as I could, and I think it remained the cold case for a reason. One of them obviously being that 50 years is a long time. There was no DNA technology or anything like that back then, but I did have the opportunity to interview Walter Williams, and Walter is in the book. And Walter was one of his running buddies, one of Mr. Goines' partners in crime, literally, and good friend. And he swears that he knows exactly who killed Mr. Goines because he describes one day that they were playing chess, and he says two tall, like huge oak tree like figures. He said rotten teeth. He described them as what appeared to be junkies themselves, but he said they showed up, two white guys, scraggly hair, and he said that the reaction from Mr. Goines was instant fear. He explained how Mr. Goines said, "Hold on a minute," and he took them and took these two guys into the bathroom and closed the door. And Walter describes kind of just hearing bits and pieces of the conversation, and he's hearing Mr. Goines say, "Well, my family's here right now. Just give me some time." Walter believes it was a drug debt because I believe something like a week or so later, Walter said was when the murder occurred. Now, is that definitive? No, but there's theories, even more than one, like that he was killed over drugs, over a debt he owed. There are people who have a very strong belief that he just got too close to the truth in his novels, and that he was killed for, I guess you might call it a form of snitching, if that's the language that you use, but snitching in the sense that he's writing about lives of actual people who are doing dirt on the street and they didn't like it. Um, there are theories of all kinds, and yeah, it troubles me every time I'm asked the question about the murder itself that I have not gotten any closer in all this time. But it's a murder is a heck of a crime to investigate, and if it's not something that is done in the open brutally, foolishly, which is not how most murders are committed, yeah, there's a lot more involved in tracking a murderer down. Typically that's just how it goes.
Yeah, man, definitely. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Now, but you saying you going into a film? Is it going to be like a documentary, or is it going to be like an actual like movie?
Oh yeah, this is the Low Road: The Life and Legacy of Donald Goines is based on the book, and it's a feature film, a dramatic film that I've been adapting for many years now. And we just in the last 2 months roughly, we got connected with a production company, and I've had some supporters over the years, independent producers, and we're all putting it together to make the big screen thing finally happen. Possibly, Netflix, whatever else. But yeah, this is a dramatic film with an actor playing the title role. Some of that is still undetermined, the who and the what and all of that. Release dates, none of that do I have the answer to just yet, but that's the vision.
Wow, that'd be amazing, man.
Yeah.
Even or you know how they do the what do they call them? Like with the Wu Tang when they do it in shows or something like that.
Oh yeah. Limited series. We've had a lot of people suggest
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
but a
limited
movie,
series.
man, anything about Donald Goines, man, that would be so interesting. But like you say, it's already in motion, so we
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
gonna make it
yeah.
happen.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the support, appreciate the energy. Looking forward to seeing it myself, man. It's been a dream I've had for a very long time.
Yeah, that's what's up, man. Okay, now for the viewers, if they want to check out the books, if they want to keep up with what you got going on in terms of the film or any other projects that you have,
Mhm.
what's the best way for them to do that? Is it social media? You got a website or?
Yeah. Well, not social media so much, but my website is eddieballenjr.com. Eddie B. Allen Jr. altogether. Not a whole lot has been updated as far as the things that I just told you related to the film itself, but that's where the information will be when there's stuff that's worth reporting. I do have a Low Road: The Life and Legacy of Donald Goines Facebook fan page. I don't know if folks still do a whole lot with those, but that's something that is also maybe of interest where a lot of Donald Goines fans have posted and kind of checked me out. I appreciate you letting me mention those things. Again, Low Road: The Life and Legacy of Donald Goines book will be reissued next year.
Okay, okay, cool. So thank you again. Thank you so much. It's definitely been an honor.
Thank
Um,
you. Same here. Tell me before you go, man. What's Ghana is how long? How long are you? Are you traveling, or are you got a spot in Ghana, or
I've
tell
been
me
out
about
here
your
since I got to Ghana in January, so I've been here since January. But I was in like Tanzania and Uganda before I got here. So my goal is to live in Africa. So I'm looking
Okay.
for land. I'm trying to get citizenship and stuff like that. So I've been to about 20 African countries. So I'm
Wow.
just trying to check out the continent and make the right choice. Because a lot of stuff going on in America, I just can't, I just can't get with it, man.
Yeah, I understand that. You have family over there, or who do you? How do you live for 6, 8 months over there?
Man, just networking, meeting people over the years. I got some friends, they family, but I'm a Black American for sure. But
Gotcha.
I do group tours. So if you know anybody that ever want to visit Africa, we just did one in March. We're doing another one in August. But we go to South Africa, Egypt, Ghana, Senegal. We go all around.
Yeah, yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. I love that, man. I have yet to make my first trip, but we've been talking about this year or next year, and it might possibly be Egypt. Ghana, I have my godmother and very good friend Sharon Dumas. Her first cousin is Stevie Wonder, and you might have heard Stevie just got his official citizenship in Ghana in the last couple of weeks. So
Yeah, man, they've been talking about it. That's big news over here because a lot of times people be like, "Well, do they like us? Do they want us there?" It's very
yeah,
welcoming, very friendly, and Ghana in particular, because Africa is almost 60 different countries. Africa got more countries than any other continent, but we kind of always narrow it down to one place. So I say that to say Ghana is very safe, low crime rate. It's one of the safest countries in Africa. In comparison
mhm,
to say like a Cleveland or Detroit, where there's so much gun violence and violent crime and stuff like that. So the people
gotcha.
want you here, they'll welcome you here, and then you could get citizenship and buy land and stuff.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, well, I couldn't help being nosy when you told me. I'm thinking you were talking to me from Cleveland, but that's a whole nother dimension of discussion. You took the time to reach out to me from over there on the coast. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And I gotta thank the viewers for tuning in. So it's been a phenomenal episode of Taye Speaks. So until next time, family.
All
Peace.
right. Thanks again.
Take care, brother.